Are you ready to drop dead? I'm not.
But at the age of 46, Dr. Teresa Sievers was found dead in the kitchen of her home in Bonita Springs, Florida, brutally murdered.
This was a violent crime that occurred in the midst of an area that didn't see violent crime and on a street that didn't see violent crime. And people were upset. People were worried.
This doctor had touched many lives and tried to help different people. So I started to get calls from all over. My son goes to that doc. My daughter-in-law goes to that doc. Wow, what a wonderful woman.
She was last seen alive at the Fort Myers, Florida airport the night before.
Because we were able to observe her in the airport on surveillance video. We ended up learning that Dr. Sievers was returning home from a family gathering for her mother's birthday from Connecticut.
Her husband, Mark, and two daughters, Josephine and Carmela, stayed behind.
And Mom came home because Dr. Sievers was the primary breadwinner and she had a practice to run.
But the next day, Dr. Sievers failed to show up at her doctor's office.
The employees at her job started texting her husband, Mark Sievers, saying, hey, Dr. Sievers isn't here.
So her husband called a next-door neighbor, Dr. Mark Petritas, to check on her.
Hey, Mark. This is Mark Petritas out of work yet. And y'all, I'll get texting and get some food trees. Maybe she's just out this week. It's just not like her. You know, I'll be there money to get a half hour late to work.
So Dr. Mark Petritas was the first one who found her.
911, what was your emergency? I'm at a friend's house. He's out of town. I can't hear a specific voice. She's dead on the floor.
Oh, so what going on?
Yeah.
What's wrong? You're doing very well.
And she's bashed in the back of the head. And she's cold. She's dead cold.
It appeared that nothing had been taken. It did not appear that the house had been ransacked. There was nothing that indicated what the motive might be for what was a very vicious crime.
On my initial observations, she has sustained significant head trauma, blunt force in nature, and there was a large pool of blood. And she was a smaller female. You could tell that it was not something that happened quickly.
The case was assigned to Lee County Sheriff's detectives Mike Downs and David Leonard.
There was no obvious smoking gun, for lack of a better choice of words.
Pretty much everybody's a suspect at that point. Who does her nails, who does her hair, who cuts her lawn, do they have a house cleaner, have they had any issues with anybody, did she get along with everybody there? But nothing really seemed to pan out. We did later find out that she also had a very strong personality, which can rub people the wrong way.
It's not wrong, but it's not enough.
There was also speculation that Dr. Sievers had been targeted because of her practice as a holistic doctor.
Why aren't we doing this kind of medicine for our body? You can have preventive medicine, but it's not the kind of medicine you typically get at your doctor's office.
There was a group of people who identified themselves as web sleuths, and they took a very big interest in this case because throughout the country, at least 2 to possibly 3 other states at that time, there were some doctors that also practiced holistic medicine as well as internal medicine that died. And the theory was that they were all murdered, and that we had to look at it because, like I said, right now, it's everybody and their brother.
The theory of it is that there were certain holistic doctors who were being murdered because they had maybe a cure for cancer or had something that the government or some kind of shadowy group didn't want them to talk about.
But that turned out to be not the case. Just so I can stay you and I won't go so far. And to be clear, the detective did conduct an interview with Teresa's husband, Mark, the TV court in Connecticut.
Anytime there is a brutal murder of a spouse, one tends to look, or at least glance, at the other spouse. But in this case, the spouse was thousands of miles away in Connecticut at the time that the crime was committed, with an alibi that was absolutely airtight.
I feel so amazing to die, but at the same time, there's so much going on. It's hard. I could stop this family. I know. Can you tell me when she died? I need to know what she told you with what happened to her.
Don't tell us.
She is so much fun. She was really, everyone says it's wife.
Everyone kept describing Mark as her rock, and she was his rock.
You ever cheated on your wife?
I've never cheated on her, she's never cheated on me.
You ever had anyone have an unhealthy obsession with either you or your wife or your kids or anything?
I absolutely can't think of anybody that would have been with that at all.
The detectives ended the interview so Mark Severs could plan Teresa's funeral and grieve with their 2 daughters.
Yeah, that's the thing somebody puts down to. Here's this lady that really helped everybody, now she's gone. And they mourned them.
But still, not a single clue about who had been waiting for Teresa that Sunday night as she pulled into her garage. After telling her husband she was home, she was safe.
How had anyone gone into this crime scene, committed this horrific crime, and left absolutely no trace evidence? This was almost the perfect crime.
Until a late-night phone call with lead detectives in a small town in Missouri.
And we catch a break. We catch a break. We get it to her.
And then she just said, I know what happened.
The call that would be the turning point in the case came into the Lee County Sheriff's Office late at night, some 2 weeks after the murder of Dr. Teresa Severs.
Thank God. Thanks God. Seriously.
The tip came from a family friend of a man in a small town in Missouri, Hillsboro, Missouri. A man by the name of Curtis Wayne Wright, a 5-time convicted felon.
Sure enough, the more we dug, the more evidence started to pile up for us. Thankfully.
And soon the detectives were on the trail of a second career criminal who was a close friend of Curtis Wayne Wright, a man by the name of Jimmy Ray Rogers.
Jimmy Ray Rogers liked to call himself the Hammer. It was on his Facebook. He liked to refer to himself as the Hammer.
Both Jimmy Ray Rogers and Curtis Wayne Wright were now very much persons of interest, but they both had denied being in Florida at the time of the murder.
When Curtis Wright told us during the weekend of the murder, first he told us he was home sick in bed and never left his car. And then he said, well, I was breaking my car all weekend.
And Jimmy was beside himself. He barely talked to us, and then just let us know he just doesn't like talk, so I'm not going to talk to you. I didn't go to Florida, and I don't talk to Wayne. He's a nerd. Oh, okay. See you later, Jimmy.
But even with the tip and the detective's gut feelings, there still wasn't anywhere near enough to arrest him. And the detectives returned to Florida to Flint.
We had a lot of digital evidence that we found that we knew we had to process and try and piece it together. Most notably, when we did the initial warrant on the Curtis Wayne Wright residence, there was a vehicle in the driveway. We found a GPS in the center console. So we were hoping, let's just hope he entered addresses in there, let's hope it tracked his movement.
And at first, we deployed it again because they're telling us this information is deleted and we can't interpret code. So they spent a significant amount of time on this code, trying to figure out this code to recover this deleted data.
And bingo!
They were able to establish a route from Curtis Wayne Wright residence in Hillsboro, Missouri, and he makes a route there to go to Jimmy Rogers' residence in Quebec, Missouri. We went from 0 to 60 in a very short amount of time.
And then 1,104 miles south along Interstate 75, off the exit to Bonita Springs, and then right to Jarvis Road, the home of Dr. Teresa Severs.
I think it was an aha moment, and I think at that moment there is the, wait a minute, we have people saying we're not here, and they are.
Retrieving an address which would have been deleted just hours or days later, and placing the killers in the area of our victim was a critical piece of this puzzle.
And the GPS data showed their every movement on the way south.
One of the significant locations was at Walmart, actually right across the street from the sheriff's office here, where we were able to capture what we believe and what is evidently Curtis Wayne Wright and Jimmy Ray Rogers walking into Walmart, buying a number of suspicious items. Rock pit set, garbage bags, cleaning items, things like that. So now we know they're down here. We can see them clear as day on the video.
On the day Dr. Seaver's returned home. I couldn't even believe it. The only thing we could think of is that they never thought we'd ever come up with, because it's not really that they never put two and two together.
And when the detectives returned to Missouri and went to question the Hammer's girlfriend, Taylor Showmaker, they hit even more people.
And she started crying, and she just said, I know what happened.
And I told him that I knew that he had something to do with it. And then he started asking questions like, well, I know that, well, I know that I killed somebody. And I said, yeah. I said, did you shoot her? And he said, no. And so then, how did you kill her? And he basically talked to me about this, and I said, yeah.
Her man had confessed to her while lying in bed.
It's huge, because he actually confessed. The King of Rogers confessed to the murder, and specifically said that they used a hammer, which is consistent with the physical evidence that we recovered from the scene.
And then Taylor Showmaker took Detective Levitt to the area
Hey, which one of my skills is required? So you don't want to get in serious trouble, huh? Okay, leave it with me.
Compared to the day, and sure enough, we get out, we walk up to it, and it's a big gun suit sitting on the side of the road.
They had their evidence. They had their clue. But the investigation was far from over. Curtis Wainwright now tells the authorities he has information they will want if he can make a deal with them.
So as difficult as it was to us a decision that had to be made to let Wright plead to second-degree murder and receive a sentence of 25 years, provided he testified truthfully.
Wright's information involved his best friend in high school, back in Missouri, Mark Severs, Teresa Severs' husband. Now, it was turning into a case of murder for hire.
Slowly. We cannot
Even before his best friend in Missouri had implicated Mark Severs in the murder of his wife Teresa, the detectives were already suspicious of Severs, especially after the second round of questioning.
We've met many people through our investigations that have lost a loved one, and it just seems fake.
When detectives would leave the interrogation, they had a sense Severs was playing to the camera.
Okay, she got hit.
I saw a lot of simulated behavior. It didn't feel real.
How could you have been hit?
It is so much of what would appear to be so much of a show.
Talking about your relationship, have you guys been contemplating any kind of separation or divorce? Has there been any marital problems?
The detectives would later learn from friends and family, the couple indeed had both marital and financial problems.
What are some of the biggest motives for anybody to do something with sinners? Money is a big one. Infidelity is another. So we have two of those on the board right now.
You can see there's more of a darker side to who he really was and who he wanted to show us.
As he was leaving, he said, I'll do anything I can to cooperate, to assist, to catch this killer.
I was making her as I can. I told him your number, my phone, so I'll get what you.
And it isn't a week later when he's no longer willing to cooperate.
We had us later contact us and shut off all contact.
He ghosted us. He stopped talking. He stopped cooperating.
The prosecutors did not need Severs' cooperation to make their case. In the first test case, with the trial of Jimmy Ray Rogers, everything hinged on whether a jury would believe Curtis Wainwright or his chilling version the murder of Teresa Severs.
They came there to kill her.
Teresa Severs' mother and sister were in the courtroom every day.
Were you able to see where he was hitting her with the hammer?
In the head.
And what happened after she fell on the floor?
He continued to hit her.
He continued to hit her?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes. I physically walked over to the area where he was at and asked him to stop with my hand on her.
It didn't take long for the jury to return a verdict.
We have a verdict in the Jimmy Ray Rogers case. As we do have a guilty verdict. We do have a guilty verdict in Jimmy Ray Rogers, but it is a second-degree murder, not a first-degree murder.
Rogers was later sentenced to 25 years in prison. But for prosecutors, there would be no justice unless they could make a case against the man they believed had hired the criminals, Mark Severs.
But for Mark Severs, there would have been no funeral. There would have been no grieving family. There would have been no children without parents. It was important that all that participated would have accountable.
The evidence against Severs continued to mount, including his use of prepaid, or what are called burner phones, used by both men.
Mark Severs and Curtis Wainwright had a secret communication system set up.
Their code word together was switch to other or other. They would almost immediately switch over to these prepaid phones, and they were able to establish a connection.
According to what White told the detectives, the plan for the murder was made when Mark Severs attended White's wedding in Missouri 2 months earlier.
This is basically where it all started coming together. Mark suggested 2 scenarios. One was to shoot her,
how can I help?
Or kill her outside of the medical practice.
Okay, so you're in serious trouble, and you need my help. Okay.
Inside of medical practice. And Mark says, well, that would be better, because if somebody else is killed during the offense, then it's likely to keep the suspicion of you or anybody else. So he explained it as collateral damage, which goes to show you the type of person Mark Severs really is.
When the time came to arrest Mark Severs, detectives knew from their surveillance exactly where to find him.
So there wasn't really anywhere Mr. Severs was going to go where we couldn't find him. Unless he had a ride into outer space that we didn't know about.
He was at home, but there was concern he was armed and might resist taking his daughter's hostage.
When we knew if he had been watching TV, and he knows we got it. We knew we had to get Mark Severs. But most importantly, we had to extract him and save those children.
The job fell to Detective David Leonard.
We knew he had many guns in the home, but his behavior was erratic. So that, coupled with the fact that he's getting arrested for the murder of his wife, he has guns in the home, and there's 2 little girls present. So we were very worried. So we get to the door. I see the girls' heads kind of perk up and look towards the door, and then I see Mark start to come towards the door, phone's in his hand, and he turns around and starts to walk away. I said to the deputies with me, I said, we're giving this another 5 seconds and we're forcing him. Fortunately, within half that time, he came back, opened the door, leaned out with his phone in his hand, and grabbed him by his wrist. You're under arrest for murdering your wife.
And walk alive, he had a smirk that I'll never forget. It was a smirk that was 1,000 miles strong. He was ice cold. You could look at him and see he was ice cold, no blood in his veins, and he knew he was cold.
But the defense was preparing a surprise twist that not only was Curtis Wainwright a killer and a skilled liar, but that White was actually in love with Mark Severs and killed Teresa on his own to get her out of the way.
Curtis can't have Mark. Nobody can.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. Right now, we are going to see opening
statements at around 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the trial of Mark Sievers.
The reporter fascinated about how much Mark Sievers and Curtis Wainwright look like each other.
They do look nearly identical.
I can't wait just to see these two former best friends looking at each other in court. One of them testifying against another. That's something straight out of the movie.
For the record, both the assistant state attorneys are present. Mr. Sievers is present, and both defense counsel. State's ready. Defense is ready.
The courtroom was packed. Like a wedding, it was aside for the wife, the victim, and aside for the husband, the accused murderers.
A little antagonistic in the crowd.
But unlike that day 12 years earlier, when Teresa and Mark Sievers were married, there was no joy on either side today.
Move to opening statements at this time. Speak.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
Cynthia Ross is the head of the homicide unit in the state's attorney's office. Her first priority was to make sure the jury knew the importance of her key witness, Curtis Wainwright, but that he was hardly a model citizen.
We were asking them to believe a killer.
Curtis Wainwright allows us to hear the conversations that occurred between he and Mark Sievers. To hear how Mark Sievers solicited, inspired, and arranged the murder of Teresa.
Defense. Mark Sievers chose Michael Mullen as the lawyer to defend him in the murder case after the two bonded during proceedings over the custody of Sievers' children.
On a very personal level, he's a very nice man. He's kind of goofy, kind of funny. And over the 4 years that I represented Mark, I got to like him. I really do like Mark.
You're going to hear about prepaid phones. You're going to hear about divorce, infidelity, life insurance as a motive. Ultimately, all the evidence of a conspiracy, all the evidence Mr. Sievers involved is going to come from one. And that's Curtis Wainwright.
I wanted to convey to the jury this was a credibility trial of Curtis Wainwright.
Next witness.
It was the very next day that Curtis Wainwright took the stand. And at first, Sievers gave off the impression of not having a care in the world, smiling and cracking jokes with his lawyer. But that would quickly change.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm to the testimony you're about to give?
Wright was questioned by prosecutor Hamid Hunter.
The biggest moment in the trial was Mr. Wright taking the stand. These two men have been best friends most of their lives.
Mr. Wright, you killed after Teresa Sievers.
Jimmy Rogers and I physically did it. Mark Sievers was also involved in the plan.
Why did you do it?
I was asked to do it.
By whom?
Mr. Sievers.
Is Mr. Sievers in court today?
Yes, he is.
Please point to Mr. Sievers and identify him by heart and clothing.
He's the metal gentleman there at the table. Darker colored jacket.
Well, I'm not a fan of Curtis Wright. He's a killer. He's an admitted killer. And so we went straight at it. There wasn't going to be any compromises for Mr. Wright.
And Wright was immediately confronted about his earlier lies when he tried to pin all the blame on Jimmy Ray Rogers.
Did you tell us the truth?
Not in the beginning.
Started out with a lie?
Well, it started out with the truth, but it got off in the middle, and then those lies were corrected. I told the truth before the end of that scene.
Watching all this in the courtroom was Sievers' stepmother from Missouri, who had known Wright since he was 12 years old.
I'm not a human lie detector, but he did a magnificent job of lying. He's a pathological liar.
Wright testified that he and Sievers, and Sievers on the left, made the deal to kill Teresa at Wright's wedding in Missouri a few months earlier.
He told me he and Teresa were having problems, marital problems. Told me that she was having an affair.
That's the shit right there.
He told me that the only option that he had was for her to die. He said that he didn't think I would kill her.
Wright said he received a $600 check to cover expenses for driving to Florida, with the promise of much more to come.
He said that there was a lot of insurance that the kids would be well taken care of. Ticket. At least $100,000 to offer him.
And then Wright chilling description of how Dr. Teresa Sievers was killed.
These are retarded.
Just as he had testified earlier at the trial of Jimmy Ray Wright.
The headlights would have been right on me. They jumped right there, probably into the house.
And when she started to turn towards you, what did you do?
Listen,
I had her.
Did she see you? Yes. Because I accidentally kicked the dog dish over. The dish is went flying everywhere and made the little noise. She started there. I was afraid that if she turned around, she would scratch me or do something to leave evidence. I swung my hammer and I hit her.
You allowed to see this ever make eye contact?
Yes.
How did she look when you made eye contact with her?
Surprised.
Did she fight?
Yeah.
You fought for her life?
Yeah. I never in a million years envisioned beating her to death with a hammer.
On cross-examination of her, Mark Sievers' lawyer tried to push a theory about Wright's sexual orientation that he thought would explain what happened.
I wanted to ask you about your sexual preference, didn't you?
Yes.
Captain Levin wanted to know if you had a sexual relationship with Mark Sievers, didn't you?
The judge told Mummer to move on.
That was a tough one because there was something. There was this air of possessiveness or intimacy, and with Curtis and Mark, nobody. My theory is that when Mark went to Curtis's wedding, that Curtis just had it. Mark married a beautiful doctor. Mark had two beautiful girls. Mark lives in a nice home in Bonita Springs, Florida. Why did Mark get capital? And I believe that anger, as well as a possible sexual attraction to Mark, caused the basis for Curtis to find his wife.
But Judge Bruce Carter was having none of it. The member had to change his tack, now challenging Wright about the money he claims Sievers promised him. Why didn't Sievers just tell him to take the cash that was in the house?
You know that there was nearly $50,000 in that home, is that correct?
I found that out later, but no, I didn't know that.
So there was $50,000. He went down to commit the murder, is that correct? Substantially.
I don't know.
Sustained. Mr. Sievers never said, I have all this money, and I'm going to set it aside for you, and you just take it, correct?
Correct.
And then after the murder, you came down again for the funeral, is that correct?
Yes.
Having the mission completed, right?
Yes.
And would get $50,000 in cash at that time.
And our agreement was it would be paid after he got his life insurance payment.
I don't believe Mark ever gave the go-ahead. If Teresa was worth more alive than dead, why would he want to get that up?
As Sievers watched his best friend testify, the smiles and jokes seemed to be replaced by tears and grief. Was it authentic?
It seemed that Mark Sievers was not the grieving husband, but just someone who could bring on tears when desired. And so we hoped that the jury would see those tears for what they were, not of those of a grieving husband, but those of a manipulator.
But some of the jurors had been in tears too.
The evidence has shown that Mark Sievers hired Curtis Wright, his best friend, to kill his wife, Dr. Teresa Sievers, an unconscionable act in light of that sacred contract. So Mr. Wright is a felon. He's an admitted liar. Did you tell us the truth?
Not in the beginning.
He's a killer. Mr. Sievers could ask him to kill his wife. Would you ask him to consider it?
Yes.
By himself. There's no reason why any reasonable person should believe a word he says. But he's corroborated by evidence. Mr. Wright says he came to Florida to kill Dr. Sievers with Jeannie Rogers. There's evidence of that. Corroborated evidence. I want you to consider asking why. I want you to keep asking why. I'm not a captain of industry, not a politician.
Hi, I'm Dr. Teresa Sievers.
She's a medical doctor and a mother to a wife. She's dead. Good morning. You've now heard all the evidence. And one question no one's answered. Why? Why? Why is Teresa Sievers dead? The best answer we can give you is she is dead because Curtis Wayne Wright killed her. And without Mr. Wright, there is no case. And the crime scene itself, those photos, they're hard to look at. And they're hard to look at because that crime scene, it's anger, and it's violence, and it's rage, and it's hate. It is not murder for money. Ultimately, the one question we all have to ask ourselves: do you trust Curtis Wayne Wright?
The jury began its deliberations just before lunchtime.
You know, you always hope it'll be fast because of the anxiety and waiting for the verdict.
When the jury goes out, we just say, we did everything we could. We did everything that we reasonably could. It was only 4 hours later when the judge called everyone back into court.
As I've been told, we have a verdict. The state's ready. Defense is ready. Does either side need any time to talk to their sides or their parties, because these things are tough and I'm not going to have any outbursts. We'll let the clerk publish the verdict.
This was almost the perfect crime.
In the Circuit Court of the 20th Judicial Circuit, in and for Lee County, Florida, criminal action. State of Florida versus Mark D. Sievers, case number 15 CF 673B.
Do you trust Curtis Wayne Wright?
Verdict. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. Count 1, first-degree murder. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. Conspiracy. The defendant is guilty of conspiracy. So say we all, December 4th, 2019, by the foreperson.
He broke down eventually there, but when that verdict was read, he was pretty stoic.
Now the question of how Mark Sievers should be punished.
My partner and I were going to have to sit down now and ask this jury to recommend a sentence of death for Mr. Severs.
The jury would have to find the murder was committed for either pecuniary, financial gain, or in a cold, calculated manner, or both. And the jury also had to consider what's called a victim impact statement from Teresa Severs' mother, Mary Ann Groves, who is now allowed to speak publicly of her loss and her grief.
And of course, the biggest loss was upon her two daughters, whom Teresa loved with all her heart. These two girls have been robbed of their remarkable mother, their home, their pets, their possessions, their family and friends. Teresa will not be able to love and guide them. She won't be there when they graduate high school, or when they need their mother to kiss away tears from their first heartbreak. We have lost our Teresa, the light of our lives, the star of our family, who loved us all so fiercely. It has been hard for all of us to go on with our daily lives. The void is unimaginable. She was our strength, our inspiration, and our caretaker.
Only one juror needed to oppose the sentence of death, and the jury was back in just 3 hours. The first question the jury had to answer was the murder committed for financial, pecuniary reasons.
The capital murder was committed for pecuniary gain? No.
Now the question of whether the murder was committed in a cold, calculated manner.
Yes. We, the jury, unanimously find that Mark Severs should be sentenced to death? Yes.
But the judge still had the power to overrule the jury's death sentence. He revealed something the jury had not been told. Severs' eldest daughter had written a letter asking that her father's life be spared.
The letter essentially said, not so many words, though I don't want a relationship with my father. If I decide that I might in some kind of future, I can't have that with you since that's what they would do.
And then, for the first time, the court heard from Mark Severs, defiant and showing no signs of remorse.
Okay, if I refer to my notes. Yes, sir, absolutely. Although the jury found me guilty, I am innocent of all charges, as I have maintained since this heinous crime took place. I love my wife, Teresa, and our two daughters, Josie and Carly, with all my heart. Our girls have tragically lost their mommy, and now they're about to lose their daddy as well. Therefore, I respectfully ask the court for life, as not to compound their loss and suffering. I am grateful, however, that the court can only determine my fate on earth, while my soul is in God's hands, and God knows the truth. I cannot feel remorse for something I had absolutely nothing to do with. I am deeply saddened, and forever heartbroken, to say the very least, that Teresa was taken from us.
Mark Severs is crying for Mark Severs. He hadn't shed a single tear for Teresa Severs at any time. The only tears Mark Severs ever shed were for Mark Severs.
Teresa is my soulmate. I will miss her and cherish her memories until we are reunited in heaven. Until then, I will fight this wrongful conviction until I am proven innocent and set free to rejoin my family.
Now the judge had to weigh the factors in favor of overturning the jury's decision that Mark Severs should be put to death.
I will note for the record that his children do not want the death penalty imposed, and he was a hands-on, devoted father, and he did help people who were in need.
But it was not enough.
A jury of 12 have found you guilty as charged, so you are guilty. And this is the order of the court that you be sentenced to death, sir.
You feel so terrible for the family. I feel so terrible for the girls because their father orphaned them.
Mark, everything you said, did not commit an act of violence. Mark is the only person in Florida's death row right now who did not commit an act of violence. To hear the judge say, death penalty, justice is served. He got exactly what he deserved. He got exactly what he deserved.
I judge people's actions. I don't judge people's souls. And if I'm wrong, and hopefully God will have mercy on both of us.
The triple murder made headlines when police believed it was a ritualistic set of killing and the appearance of a rarely seen blue moon.
It's witchcraft. I'll say that right now. This murder was front page news.
Hey, what's up? Oh, how can I help? So you don't want to get in serious trouble, huh? Okay, leave it with me.
Richard was shot at a wound to his head. John, whoever did it, was able to cut his throat. The mom was killed in the same manner. She was hit in the head as well with a hammer, and her throat was also cut.
Richard worked in the crypto department, and of course, when you have those high clearances and you don't show up for work, a lot of people get very concerned.
Whoever did this came over there for a specific reason.
Why so much focus on the cigarette butt and the trash? Because it's bad for them. It is beyond a reasonable doubt bad for them.
I'm gonna find out and I'm gonna put your ass in jail.
If you put something out bad, expect bad. That's how it works.
This is what he's gonna do. Situation.
And they're in the first place to put money.
No, sir. The only thing they could do was kill him.
You want to say anything? Leave the jury to find the defendant.
There's 67 counties in Florida. We're the last county in Florida before you cross the state line and you're in the state of Alabama.
We are affectionately known as the Redneck Riviera, and we have the prettiest beaches in the world.
But that's not all. Escambia County, Florida is known for.
We unfortunately have witnessed our fair share of odd crimes throughout the years. We've had, the Black Widow murders were here. The lady that killed several of her husbands. We had the Billings case where the family was murdered in the home and they had 8 special needs children.
We seem to find our way in the paper probably more than we would like.
And it was here that the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy was captured.
He didn't get away from us. We ended up prosecuting him, and of course he was finally put to death. But he's just one in that long string of people that somehow have a tie to Escambia County. We jokingly say that Escambia County is this, Twilight Zone vortex.
And no case fit that description better than what came to be called the Blue Moon Murders, connected to a rare astrological occurrence with historical overtones of witchcraft.
It's bullshit. Ain't nobody dying from the witchcraft.
There are some indications of what the movie is. This murder was front page news.
The media really latched onto the Blue Moon witchcraft murder.
3 members of one family found dead in their modest home.
Initial research has led us to believe that there is a potential that it was a ritualistic killing.
The way in which each of the victims were killed was very brutal.
The time of death, we believe, on Tuesday also coincides with what's referred to as a blue moon. It's witchcraft. I'll say that right now.
The crime scene itself was a puzzle for investigators.
It was kind of a macabre scene. It was so out of the ordinary.
The house was kind of in disarray. They noticed that there were piles of blankets and clothing. Once they kind of looked at the outer edges of those piles of blankets and clothing, in the den area, they observed a cord. And they also observed a female hand, underneath one of the piles.
The body of an elderly woman, Bonseal Smith, and under the other piles of clothing, her 2 adult sons, Richard and John.
Well, whoever had done this had taken time, obviously, to cover the bodies up.
The investigation was led by then Escambia County Homicide Detective Matt Infinger.
The position of John sitting on the couch, whoever did it walked right up to him, hit him in the head with a hammer, and then was able to cut his throat. He didn't even try and defend himself. So he was either asleep or knew the individual. The mom was killed in the same manner. She was killed in her chair in the living room where she always stayed and watched TV. She was hit in the head as well with a hammer. Her throat was also cut. Richard was shot, had a wound to his head, and his throat was also cut.
And investigators came to learn from neighbors that there was an aura of mystery about the victims themselves, starting with the mother.
She was a woman who apparently never left the house. She ordered from QVC. She'd get 5 and 6 packages a day from QVC. The home was just stuffed with boxes, dresses, and all sorts of things that she bought from QVC. These people, they stayed to themselves. There were neighbors that didn't have any interaction with them.
The older brother, Richard, worked at the Pensacola Naval Air Station for a secretive Homeland Security Division, which added to the mystery surrounding the case.
Richard worked in the crypto department. You know, some of this we really aren't at liberty to talk about, some of the elements of the case, but he worked in the crypto room, which is all the codes that they teach the Navy folks. And of course, when you have those high clearances and you don't show up to work, a lot of people are very concerned.
So certainly one of the things that investigators looked into was whether Richard Smith's job had anything to do with his murder as well as the murder of his family members.
When Richard Smith's body was discovered, his car keys were missing, and there was DNA in one of his front pants pockets that was not identified, which is a pretty strange thing to have happen.
And a full federal investigation was launched to see if some foreign assassin or terrorist was somehow connected to what happened to the family.
There was 2 DHS investigators that worked with me on the case, and we were able to determine that there was nothing that Richard was working on that would lend to this type of thing happening to him.
What the investigators were focused on instead